Hello and welcome to another episode of First and 16. I am your host, Adam Gibby. Thank you for joining us here today. We're back on YouTube. I know it's been very hit and miss, but this is too big of a story, too big of an event to not have on YouTube. So thank you for listening on YouTube. If you're on the podcast, if you can do me a huge favor, scroll down there, see a little 5 stars, just scroll down, see that 5 stars, hit subscribe, hit a 5 star, really helps us grow this show. The season's over. The regular season is over. And for many fans, it's really sad. It's really sad when you really kind of think about how, for many people, the college world is college football and college basketball. Now, granted, of course, we have college baseball. You might be a volleyball or a soccer fan, track and field, whatever it is. But for a vast majority of us, it is college football and college basketball. And for the last 7 months, since the end of August, we have had constant coverage of college football and college basketball. Now, obviously, the season's not completely over yet. We still have March Madness. We still have 8 teams that are going to be playing for a national championship. And we get that start off next week. But we're going to talk about a couple of things. First off, we're going to wrap up the regular season. Like I said, it's over. It's done. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Also going to give a grade for every single school in the Big 12, all 16 teams. I want to give my criteria, how I'm getting to those different grades. We're going to talk about that. And then finally, I want to give you my final seed projections on where I think teams are going to ultimately land heading into Selection Sunday. Let's start off with this, wrap up the regular season. I think overall it was a great year. I think it was a fantastic year. Big 12 dominated against the SEC. They did very well against the ACC. They did okay against the Big 10, against the Big East. Not fantastic, but they held their ground. And overall, I think that when you look at the best players in college basketball, you look at Darren Peterson, AJ DeBonsa. You got to look at Fleming. I mean, you got all these different guys that played fantastic this year. And so many of them came from the Big 12, which is great for the conference. I do think that there were definitely some bumps and bruises along the way. Plenty of injuries to go around. Definitely plenty to critique from the way that the refs in the Big 12 just let guys play. I think that they let them play a little too much. I think that a lot of these injuries could have been prevented had the game been called a little bit tighter. Now, I'm not calling for the SEC whistle. If you know what I'm talking about, the SEC whistle is basically the whistle that every time you get contact, you're going to the free throw line. I don't like that. I don't think that that's the answer. But I do think we should see the game cleaned up a little bit. We have plenty of conversation, obviously, about the LED court. My 2 cents on it is this. I think it's fine. I think it's fine. I love the innovation of it. I think that it definitely has a place in college basketball. I understand the whole traditional hardwood thing, but I mean, we're innovating all the time anyways. We got the transfer portal, we got NIL, we got all these different things changing. We got new tournaments. We've got the NIT basically dying. I mean, to say that a hardwood is going to be the line we draw, come on. And I understand the whole critique of, oh, well, guys were slipping. Maybe a little bit more than normal, but I don't think it was that much more. I don't think it was much more at all. In fact, I think the reason why it got brought up is because there are 30 losers and only 2 winners in the Big 12 between the women's and men's tournaments. And we as fans like to choose something to blame when our favorite team doesn't win. Normally, it's the referees. Sometimes it's clock management. Sometimes it's whatever it is. Okay. Sometimes we just blame the environment. And I think that the LED court kind of became the easy answer. It kind of became the simple, yeah, that's the reason why this isn't working. That's why it can't be done. That's why we didn't win. I don't really buy it. And it's kind of like a couple of years ago, if you remember, right after Donald Trump was reelected, he made some cuts to what is it, the FFA or FAA, whatever it is with airports and security and all that. Anyway, you get the point. There were plane crashes, and every single plane crash appeared and was making massive news because that's what we were focused on. It's what the American people were talking about. When in reality, the amount of plane crashes was the same. It never changed. In fact, if anything, it may have dipped a little bit. But because it was the focus on what we were talking about, it became a trending topic. And whenever it happened, it became a massive story. Same thing here. Guys fall in basketball all the time. They slip. It happens. But when it's being talked about, when it's under the microscope, suddenly we're noticing it a lot more than we normally would. And so for me, I don't have a problem with the court. I think it's fantastic, and I hope it gets brought back. Unfortunately, I feel like it might be an experiment that will not see its return anytime soon. Finally, to wrap up the season, I think the last thing we got to talk about is it was a fun year. It was just fun. I think this conference showed once again why it is the best conference in America. The teams on top, elite. Teams in the middle, really good. Teams at the bottom, well, not everybody can be great. And I think we saw that for sure. All right, I want to give a grade now. Let's move on to the next segment. Give a grade to every single team in the Big 12. And what I basically did with this is I look at the entire body of work. Okay, there is some emphasis on how you finished. However, at the same time, when you're in school, if you have a 100-point assignment the first week of school, it carries the same amount of weight as a 100-point assignment the last day of the quarter, the last day of the semester. So I'm going to kind of take that approach. Again, yes, what you did lately does matter. Yes, I do think that is the most important. But I'm not going to completely throw away the non-conference and just focus on the last 2 weeks of the season. I don't think that'd be right. And so with that, let's get right to it. Start off with our highest grade. The Arizona Wildcats, A+. 16-2 in conference play. Undefeated in non-conference play. They looked like the best team all year. They played fantastic, and they dominated. They're going to be a 1 seed. A+. I don't know what else you would have wanted for them. I mean, maybe not drop those 2 games, but I mean, come on. It's the Big 12. Speaking of an A, got to give it to Houston. Played in the Big 12 championship today. Also a great non-conference. Probably kept Auburn out of the tournament. Thank you for that. No bad losses. And, I mean, they didn't win the league, so they're not going to get an A+. But again, an elite team, an elite defense, and I'm excited to see how far this team can go in March. All right, so now let's move on to Texas Tech. A-. I think all things considered, losing Toppin, they still stayed afloat. They still played very well. They had a last game that was not great, but again, when you look at their entire season, they were one of the teams, and they still are one of the teams that I think can make a deep run in the NCAA tournament. And for the final A, an A-, Iowa State. Iowa State is the one team here that feels like they could win a national championship or they could lose in the first round. This team is very inconsistent. However, they're very, very good. They win most of their games. And I think they've got a really good shot on being a 2 seed overall in the NCAA tournament. Again, I think their biggest thing is they would occasionally drop that weird game. They lost to BYU. They lost to TCU. Again, not terrible teams to lose to, but also not at the same level as Houston, same level as Arizona. And so they're going to get an A-. Now let's move on to the B tier. Kansas gets a B+. They didn't have the best record in the Big 12, but they got the 3 seed, and they were a very solid but not dominant team. Darren Peterson, one of, if not the most electric player in the whole entire country. However, he didn't always play, and he did have games that he was off. Just as an example, in the semifinals, he shot 24%. That's not the kind of percentage you can have in a Big 12 semifinal game. My worry is that Darren Peterson is going to dictate how far Kansas can go in the Big 12, in the NCAA tournament. If he plays at the elite level that we've seen him play at, they're a Final Four team. If he has an off game again, they could lose in the first round. I'm not entirely sure where they'll end up. But again, very good season for Kansas. And let me also just mention that this isn't based off of team expectations. And in terms of for Kansas, this wasn't a good year for Kansas. Okay. I'm not grading it off of that. I'm grading it just as everybody's equal ground. Okay. So again, Kansas fans will not say it was a B plus kind of season, but when you actually take a step back, look at it from the entire picture, that's why I give it a B plus. Another B plus, although not quite as high. So maybe 89 for Kansas and 87 for TCU. 11-7 in this league is fantastic. They were completely off of the picture, completely off the radar. Nobody was really talking about them. They were a disappointment for the first half of the Big 12 season. And then they figured it out. They won basically all of their games leading up to the tournament. And they show that they can be a real threat. You do not want to be playing TCU in the first round of the NCAA tournament. My projection is they might end up in the 8-9 game. And that's unfortunate for even a 1 seed, assuming TCU makes it through. I'm not saying or projecting TCU is going to beat a 1 seed. Whoever that is, whether that's UConn or whether that's Michigan or Duke, or maybe Florida stays as a 1 seed. I don't know. But I think they can make it very uncomfortable. And if you're a 1 seed, you want to kind of cruise to the first weekend, and TCU is not going to allow that. The next team on this list is BYU with a B-. BYU's B- primarily comes from how they finished. Perhaps the best player in the country with AJ DeBonsa, averaging over 25 points per game. This team felt like a team of destiny. And early in the season, they were. Took down Clemson. They almost beat Nebraska in a preseason game that they didn't even play their starters in late in the game. They almost took down UConn on the East Coast. They had a lot of great wins. They looked like a team that could really push for a Final Four. And then the injuries started to stack up. And it's hard to grade a team based off of injuries. However, when you look at BYU, what they are today, they seem to have figured something out. I don't think they're really a threat to make it past the Sweet 16, but they're definitely a threat to pull off an upset in the second round. This team has elite talent, but they have to be hitting on all cylinders. They cannot have 2 or 3 of their guys have an off night if they expect to win any games in the NCAA tournament. Next on the list is UCF. UCF, similar to BYU, started off fantastic. Even halfway through conference play, they looked really, really good. And then things kind of faded towards the end. And unfortunately, if there's a team that's not going to make it past the first round of the NCAA tournament, it feels like it's UCF. UCF just really, really struggled down the stretch. Kind of showed what they basically played how we thought they would play all year, the last 5 or 6 games of the season. That's the reason I have concern. But then again, sometimes teams make massive runs. They just need a week to take off, which UCF has. Next on the list is West Virginia. We're in the C's now. West Virginia gets a C+. Win-loss record, they were actually good. They were okay. In conference, they were 9-9. They were very annoying to play against. They're very physical. They're what you expect from West Virginia. The problem is West Virginia didn't win the big game enough. They didn't push teams quite enough to the point to where they're going to make the field. And for them, that's a disappointment. And for any team, that's a disappointment. When you have the expectation of we are going to make it to the tournament, and then it just doesn't happen. Similar grade can go out to Cincinnati. Cincinnati finished really hot. They finished really, really hot. They won, I believe it was 6 of their final 7 games. I think had they won in the quarterfinals, they had pulled off the upset against TCU, I think that they're in the tournament. Everybody around the bubble this year was losing games left and right. Cincinnati had every opportunity in the world to make it. They didn't do it. Really, it was their non-conference that really hurt them. And unfortunately, that's going to keep them out of the tournament. Those are our C's. Now we get into the bad grades. With a D+, Arizona State showed flashes, but not nearly enough. They had the upsets, but not nearly enough. Really struggled in the non-conference. Just never really got it going. Again, you saw the flashes. You saw this team, what they were capable of, but they just didn't put it together quite enough to even really make them a bubble team towards the end of the season. Next team, Oklahoma State, also with a D+. Really great non-conference, really bad conference. They had a few nice wins. They beat BYU at home. That was a nice win. But overall, when you go 6-12 in league, you're just not going to be in a spot to make the tournament, especially in the Big 12. Really, you need to be in the SEC to even be on the bubble with that kind of record. Even though I don't feel like that's right, it's the world we live in. Now for a solid D, Colorado. They actually finished 7-11 in conference, but they didn't really beat anybody that they shouldn't have. They didn't really lose to anybody that they shouldn't have. They just kind of did what they were supposed to do. They beat those teams worse than them. They lost to the teams who were better than them. And they were just quietly there. They weren't really ever a bubble team, never really in the conversation. They were just that team. Now let's get to the D- range. We got Baylor, 6-12 in conference. That's not going to cut it in Waco. Again, a good team. I feel like the talent was there. And credit to them. They didn't have any guys on their roster 11 months ago. They were able to pull together a team. They were able to have a decent non-conference. But again, once they got into the conference season, just didn't really string together wins. And that's not going to be enough to be able to get into the tourney or really make any kind of noise around the bubble. Now we have our two Fs. They're going to go together here. Utah and Kansas State. In terms of expectations, Kansas State clearly did worse. But again, we're not talking about expectations. Otherwise, I would have given BYU a much lower grade as well. We're just talking about clean slate. Everybody's taking the same test. Everybody's getting the same study guide. Everybody has the same expectations. Kansas and Utah combine to go 5-31 in conference. Don't really ever pull off any massive upsets. Don't really ever make things all that interesting. Although Kansas State did hang around in a lot of games, they just never quite got over the top. Just a rough season. And I think both teams are ready for the offseason. And I think both teams are looking into the transfer portal to see what they can get next. So those are the grades. Let me know how I did. What would you change? Who do you agree with? Who do you disagree with? Just let me know on X at @first&16_pod, or leave a comment here on YouTube. That could also be super fun to have that dialogue. I will comment back. If you comment on these YouTube videos, I will respond. We can have that conversation. Now let's get into seed projections. I'll do this real quick. We're already near 20 minutes. I think Arizona 1 seed. No question. I think it's pretty obvious. Houston, by making it to the Big 12 championship, earned themselves a 2 seed. And I think they're a safe 2 seed. Also a 2 seed, I think you got to give it to Iowa State. Made it to the semifinals. No, they didn't have the greatest game ever. But I don't think people are really going to hold that against them. So Iowa State, I think, is also a 2 seed, although they're the last 2 seed. They could potentially slide to a 3 seed if the dominoes don't fall right. But if they get a 3 seed, they probably get a favorable location for their first couple of games. 3 seeds, I actually don't have any. I don't have any 3 seeds, but I do have a couple of 4 seeds. I think Kansas and Texas Tech both did enough this year to earn a 4 seed, which you want the 4 seed. 4 seed is a good place to be. It's a nice place to be because you don't end up playing the 1 until you get to the Sweet 16, which for a team that's not in the top 2 seeds, that's a good place to be. Also, you play a 5 seed in the second round, which is much more manageable than what a lot of these other teams have to do. Also, 5 seeds historically aren't great. 5 seeds, they a lot of times they're teams that are kind of fading, kind of falling off a little bit, kind of thing like a Purdue kind of thing. Just the kind of teams that were 1 or 2 seeds and just kind of lost. I'll even call one in the Big 12, kind of like a BYU, where that's a favorable matchup. Whereas if you're the 3 seed, and in the second round, you're having to play the 6 seed. Sometimes those 6 seeds are kind of those pesky teams. So 4 seed, not the worst place to be in for those teams. 5 seed got nobody. 6 seed got BYU. I think BYU did enough in the Big 12 tournament. I think also the regular season finale victory over Texas Tech. I think it showed the group that makes the tournament that this team can still win games. They're still a very dangerous team. I think they'll get a 6. As we move on, no 7 seeds. I think the 8 seed, I think TCU earned an 8 seed. Now, whether they're an 8 or a 9 doesn't really matter. Just in terms of that game. Normally the 8s and 9s, pretty equal on talent, pretty equal in projections. Have to go on and play the 1 seed in the second round. It's kind of the worst place to be in if you are in the tournament. And finally, UCF, I think they're an 11. I think they avoid the play-in. I think that Miami of Ohio losing in the MAC conference tournament, I think that helped UCF avoid that. But again, it's going to be very interesting to see if they end up in that first 4, which isn't the worst thing in the world. 11 seeds historically do better if they win their first 4 game and then play the 6 seed than if they just play the 6 seed in the first game. It has something to do with getting the nerves out, kind of getting a feel for the court, because all the courts are the same in the first couple of rounds. And I think it's beneficial. So UCF may actually want the playing game, but we'll see what happens. So those are the seed projections. Again, let me know. Thank you for joining us today. So glad you could join us. We will have a full show about everything that goes down on Selection Sunday. Have a good one.